my cellar, down in my cellar, I've been changing everything around. I've a secret hid there, I've got it with my life. There's only one mistake I made. I told it to my wife.
During the early 20th century, in a wave of conservatism spreading throughout the country, the temperance movement in the United States began to regain strength. Their goal was simple: to eliminate the consumption of alcohol. The movement's origins date back to the 1800s, building on the even earlier puritanical tradition of the first European settlers. In 1826, the American Temperance Society was formed. Soon after, followed the establishment of the Prohibition Party in 1869, the Women's Christian Temperance Union in 1874, and the Anti-Saloon League in 1893.
Well, prohibition was really a metaphor for the changes in the country in the early part of the 20th century. That is to say that those who were in favor of prohibition were in favor of America remaining pretty much a Protestant society, remaining a custom-bound society. And they were mainly concerned that drinking was a recreational sport that was practiced disproportionately by ethnic groups, Italians and the Irish and the blacks. So it should always be seen as an attempt to impose on the larger society, and specifically on immigrants and migrants and poor people and people of color, what we might call a form of social control.
As you continue through the 19th century, you start seeing a movement towards having legal restrictions on alcohol. And part of this shift comes from, one, the inability of the largely, middle class, white, usually Anglo-Saxon background, religious folks to change the behavior of those they saw who were engaging in immoral behavior from the lower classes. And you also see increasingly, as it becomes a political movement, you see the emergence of some political parties, most notably the Prohibition Party and the Anti-Saloon League by the end of the 19th century. So you have a change in the movement starting around the middle, probably, of the 19th century, from the idea of abstinence to legal prohibition of alcohol. And that really emerges in the late 19th century. And part of that change you can connect very much to fears of an immigrant class, a class of workers who need to show up for their jobs, a class of individuals who it's often believed have different moral values, different customs, different traditions. And it's believed that you can't use the idea of moral suasion, the idea of persuading somebody that drinking is wrong, but that they need the kind of compulsory legal methods that prohibition entails.
Now, leading from that observation, who were the prohibitionists? Well, they tended to be Protestant. They tended to be of middle-class stature. A lot of women were involved in the struggle, the battle against the bottle, because they believe, rightly or wrongly, that the consumption of alcohol pulled down a society's morality, imperiled women, broke up families. And they had a litany of fears, the Protestant whites did, a litany of fears that drinking would endanger their perception of America as a decent, wholesome society.
But there's also another side of this, that there are others who would be considered members of a variety of socioeconomic classes who are involved in the prohibition movement as well, going way back, who are concerned with drinking among people they see as their peers, particularly women who are very interested in the issues of family violence, of women having some sort of rights to preserve a certain economic stability within their families. And so you get women from a variety of classes, again, mostly, middle class, upper class women who would have the time to pursue this vigorously. But you do get women from a variety of classes who are concerned over the prohibition issue.
Their ultimate objective was met in 1919 with the passing of the 18th Amendment, drawn up by the House of Representatives in 1917. In only 13 months, the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic liquors was prohibited after Congress obtained the necessary ratification from 36 of the 49 states. In 1919, the Volstead Act was passed to support the amendment by empowering the federal government to enforce their ban on alcoholic beverages.
When Prohibition does come around, it's very much this same middle class that defies a lot of the legal aspects of Prohibition, who continues to engage in drinking, where these speakeasies of kind of going out on the town really becomes something very much tied to 1920s culture. In their defense, possibly to some extent, there were many who were shocked with the passage of Prohibition when intoxicating beverages were actually defined. A large part of the population had believed that intoxicating beverages would refer to distilled spirits, the so-called hard liquors. There were several ways in which World War I aided the cause of Prohibition. One of the most obvious being the fact that alcohol generally was made from grain. And you have, in the early years of World War I, even before the United States entered the war, the United States was really supplying the Allies with foodstuffs to feed their populations and soldiers. This increased as the United States entered the war as well. And as you have limits to grain being available for families, you have specifically limiting but encouraging families to go without grain for certain days. It'd be like a grain-free day. You have the slogan come out, shall the many have food or the few have drink? And it was viewed very much as wasteful for individuals to be drinking alcohol that was made from grain that could be feeding soldiers fighting in the war.
The 18th Amendment appeared to be successful. Across the nation, the consumption of alcohol decreased. The statistical evidence was compelling. But a huge problem was brewing, a growing disobedience towards law enforcement and the law. People wanted to drink, and they were not going to be prevented from drinking.
People like to drink. For some ethnic groups, having a beer, having a shot of whiskey is a ritual law of long standing. It was also difficult to enforce because the law was largely unenforceable. By the 1920s, many cities had spaces where people did all sorts of things: drinking, prostitution, interracial contact, and it became an issue. What is the most important part of a society that needs to be protected by local authorities? Is it a guy who wants a couple of glasses of beer after work, or is it someone who would do harm, physical harm, endangering the life and limb of somebody? But the major reason why it was hard to enforce is that it was imposed on the society, and the society obviously did not buy it as much as the prohibitionists wanted it to.
Prohibition in the larger cities, particularly the cities of the Northeast, New York City, obviously being the most well-known for its speakeasies, but again, a large number of cities often ignored prohibition by and large and had left enforcement to the federal government. In New Jersey, upon the passage of prohibition, you had the governor, Edward I. Edwards, was purported to say that he intended to keep New Jersey, quote, as wet as the Atlantic Ocean. And, you know, the Volstead Act received very little support from any state or local communities in New Jersey.
Bootlegging became a significant problem that the national government did not have the means nor desire to enforce. It was difficult to patrol every border, river, lake, and speakeasy in America. It also consumed vast amounts of resources.
Without the support, again, from the state and local government, there was very little that could be done about it. The federal forces were very limited through most of the 1920s. They probably had about 1,500 federal agents to cover the entire country. And many of them were easily bribed and were corrupt themselves. So enforcement was incredibly difficult in these years. When you see national forces cracking down on a lot of the alcohol, a lot of those film clips that you'll see of, you know, destroying these huge barrels of alcohol and smashing bottles were very much staged. Either some of them were, you know, outright fake. Others were, you know, a large cache of alcohol would be located, and before anything was done, it was made sure that the cameras would come in, so that the efforts of the federal forces really seemed to be much more effective than they were.
Illegality in American cities like Newark might be condemned by some, usually the Protestant, usually people of long standing. But for immigrants, for people who are trying to climb up the ladder of social mobility, these people might see, say, booze running, or numbers running, or card sharking. These people might see it as a legitimate business because ethnic groups oftentimes were closed out of the more legitimate businesses. So what you have in this whole area of crime is a struggle between social classes. So what you had, for example, in Newark, you had drinking places that were well known to the police, but were not policed by the police because the police realized that it was hard to enforce prohibition ordinances. There is some evidence that Port Newark was a connecting link in this kind of vast transportation network that brought illegal booze into New Jersey.
Breweries, interestingly, some shut down, but some stayed in business for a variety of reasons. You have a brewery actually in Harrison, New Jersey, called the Hauk Brewery that supposedly continued to produce beer because they got their water from these underground wells, so it couldn't be monitored how much water they were using, so nobody really knew how much beer they were producing, and supposedly they stayed in business producing beer throughout Prohibition as well. A lot of the risk really was with those who distributed the alcohol, but there were such huge profits to be made that for many it was worth it.
Prohibition had social and economic effects on communities across the country. The city of Newark was no exception.
There were speakeasies in the 3rd Ward. There were speakeasies in the 1st Ward. A simple definition of a speakeasy is a place that, to an extent, is off the books, a place where some illegal activity, whether it's gambling or drinking or prostitution, occur largely unscrutinized, unmonitored by the police for the reasons that I gave before. Drinking is in many ways a very Southern recreational activity. People drink, men especially, workers especially. They drink for all sorts of reasons, to relieve the tension of their jobs, the tension of their impoverishment, the tensions of the racial reality of being black in a place like South Carolina. And when these people come to, say, New Jersey, or there could be other northern states, they bring that tradition of drinking with them, and it strikes long-standing Newarkers, black and white, is that these people are bringing into, let's say, Newark, public behavior that is off-putting. Keep in mind that one of the biggest businesses in 19th century Newark was brewing. I mean, this was a brewing city with Fegan Spand and Ballantine and many more, which did not survive the 19th century. Newark was a beer drinking town because it was a working town. It was an ethnic town. You had a lot of ethnic groups in the city that drank beer as a part of the social, cultural life of their community. The other reason why Newark had so many brewers is that Newark's water was remarkably clean, or except for the Passaic River. Once brewers started tapping into clean water in northern New Jersey, it was said then, and it could probably still be said now, that the best tasting beer in America in the 19th century was brewed in Newark. I would suspect, given that Newark is such an old city and that its infrastructure has all kinds of nooks and crannies, there would be tunnels that would serve as secret havens where illegal things, contraband, could be stored. That would not surprise me at all.
The tunnels make for really good stories. They go back to other stories as well. Many of them connect to the dock areas and most likely would have been useful as ships perhaps pulled in with smuggled alcohol and bringing them in. A lot of them, exist, and it's not clear whether or not they were used in Prohibition or not. There's also a lot of mystery surrounding them, which is fascinating, sort of a denial that they exist sometimes, or very difficult to kind of get access to them. A lot of places, individuals not wanting to have that connection to the Prohibition past, and other places wanting to kind of play that up so that they can kind of have sort of the tourist attraction of going through the tunnels. So it's really difficult to find the clear historical evidence that does link the tunnels to Prohibition, but they does seem that at least at times that they were used, and that it makes sense that sometimes at least that liquor was stored in these tunnels, if not always smuggled through them.
Down in my cellar, I've been changing everything around. I've a secret hid there, I'll guard it with my life. There's only one mistake I made. I told it to my wife, now everybody wants a key to my cellar, my cellar.